Welcome to An Interview in History. Imagine a podcast that serves as a bridge across time, connecting listeners to the voices of history's most impactful figures. Each episode is a deep dive into the lives and legacies of these individuals, exploring not just their well-documented achievements, but also uncovering lesser-known facts that shaped their contributions to our world. From scientists who unlocked the mysteries of the universe to activists who fought for social change, each story is a testament to the indelible mark they left on society. This journey through history will not only educate, but also inspire listeners to appreciate the intricate tapestry of human progress. This week on An Interview in History, we're talking with Benjamin Harrison. He was the 23rd President of the United States, serving from 1889 to 1893. He was a member of the Harrison family of Virginia, a grandson of the 9th President, William Henry Harrison, and a great-grandson of Benjamin Harrison V, a founding father. A Union Army veteran and a Republican, he defeated incumbent Grover Cleveland to win the presidency in 1888. This interview takes place on February 19th, 1900. President Harrison, thank you for joining us today. Let's start at the beginning. Could you tell us about your parents and siblings?
Certainly. I was born on August 20th, 1833 in North Bend, Ohio. My father, John Scott Harrison, was a congressman, and my mother, Elizabeth Ramsey Irwin, was a devoted mother. I come from a distinguished family. My grandfather, William Henry Harrison, was the 9th President of the United States. I was one of 10 children, and though we weren't wealthy, we were raised with strong values and a sense of public duty.
That's quite a lineage. What was your early life like?
Growing up in Ohio, I enjoyed outdoor activities like hunting and fishing, but education was always emphasized. My father ensured we had a disciplined upbringing, and I spent much of my childhood reading and studying.
Where did you go to school?
My early schooling took place in a log cabin near my home, but my parents later arranged for a tutor to help me with college preparatory studies. When I was 14, myself and my older brother Irwin enrolled in Farmers College near Cincinnati, Ohio in about 1847. I attended the college for 2 years, and while there I met my future wife, Carolyn Lavinia Scott. She was a daughter of John Witherspoon Scott, who was the school's science professor and also a Presbyterian minister. I transferred to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. I graduated in 1852. Miami was an excellent school, and I was fortunate to study under great professors who instilled in me a love for law and public service.
Speaking of law, was that your first career?
Yes. After Miami University, I read law in Cincinnati and was admitted to the Indiana bar in 1854. I moved to Indianapolis, where I built a successful law practice.
Now, before we get into politics, let's discuss your military service. You served in the Civil War, correct?
That's right. When the war broke out, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 70th Indiana Infantry. I eventually rose to the rank of brigadier general. My men and I saw action in several campaigns, including the Atlantic Campaign under General Sherman. The war was a defining experience for me. It reinforced my belief in the Union and in the necessity of strong national leadership.
Now let's shift to your personal life. Tell us about your marriage and your children.
Well, I married Carolyn Lavinia Scott in 1853, and we had 2 children, Russell and Mary. Carolyn was a wonderful wife and a dedicated First Lady during my presidency. After her passing in 1892, I later married Mary Lord Diminick, my late wife's niece, in 1896. We had 1 daughter, Elizabeth. Okay, now to your presidency. What were the major challenges and accomplishments of your administration? I served as the 23rd president, and my administration focused on economic modernization, civil rights, and expanding American influence. I signed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, which was the first federal effort to regulate monopolies. We also passed the McKinley Tariff to protect American industries, though it was controversial. Foreign policy was another focus. I strengthened the Navy and worked on reciprocal trade agreements. Additionally, I supported voting rights for African Americans in the South, though, unfortunately, the Lodge Bill to protect those rights failed in the Senate. Mr. Harrison, who was your vice president, and how well did you work together? My vice president was Levi P. Morton of New York. He was a seasoned politician and a successful businessman before entering politics. We worked together well, though I wouldn't say we were particularly close. Morton was more focused on the ceremonial duties of the vice presidency rather than playing an active role in shaping policy. He was well respected, especially in financial and business circles, and his influence helped secure support for the economic policies of my administration. However, when I sought re-election in 1892, the party leadership replaced him on the ticket with Whitelaw Reid, partly due to political maneuvering within the Republican Party. Despite that, I always appreciated Morton's steady and reliable presence during my time in office. I know you spoke briefly about your accomplishments in office, but what do you feel is your greatest accomplishment during your time in office? If I had to choose, I would say my greatest accomplishment was strengthening the federal government's role in regulating the economy and modernizing the nation. The Sherman Antitrust Act was a landmark achievement. It was the first major federal law aimed at curbing monopolies and ensuring fair competition in business. While it wasn't always enforced effectively at first, it laid the foundation for future trust-busting efforts. I also took great pride in expanding and modernizing the U.S. Navy, ensuring our country had a stronger global presence. Additionally, I fought for civil rights, pushing for federal voting protections for African Americans in the South, though Congress unfortunately did not pass the legislation. Beyond that, my administration admitted 6 new states to the Union: North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming, helping shape the nation's future. These accomplishments reflect my belief in a strong, forward-looking America. We also talked about your challenges. But what do you feel was your most challenging struggle during your presidency? One of my greatest struggles was the fight for civil rights and voting protections for African Americans in the South. I strongly supported the Federal Elections Bill of 1890, also known as the Lodge Bill, which aimed to protect black citizens' voting rights against suppression and intimidation. Unfortunately, despite my efforts, the bill failed in the Senate due to opposition from Southern Democrats and even some within my own party. It was deeply frustrating to see such an important measure defeated, knowing the injustices that would continue without federal enforcement. Another major challenge was the McKinley Tariff of 1890. While it was designed to protect American industries by raising tariffs on foreign goods, it also led to higher consumer prices. This, combined with rising economic concerns, made it unpopular among the public and contributed to my defeat in the 1892 election. Additionally, managing tensions within my own party was difficult. I faced opposition from Republican factions, including those loyal to my predecessor, James G. Blaine. Political infighting made it challenging to push my full agenda forward. Despite these struggles, I remain committed to my principles, ensuring a strong economy, protecting American industry, and standing up for civil rights, even when the political climate made it difficult. I've heard that you focused on the right of workers to earn a living wage, while also advocating a social security fund providing coverage for old age, accidents, and sickness. I have in public expressed the opinion that every working man ought to have such wages as would yield him decent and comfortable support for his family and enable him to keep his children in school and out of the mill in their tender age. Not only should he have this, but his wages should be sufficient to allow him to lay up against incapacity by sickness or accident or old age, some fund on which he could rely. That's interesting. Now, your family had a strong political background. How did that influence your career? Absolutely. My grandfather was president, and my great-grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence. Public service was always a tradition in my family, and I felt a duty to uphold it. My father, a congressman, taught me the importance of civic responsibility. I never sought office for personal gain. It was always about service to the country. Mr. Harrison, can you tell me about your great-grandfather and grandfather, and specifically the influence they had on your life? Certainly. My great-grandfather, Benjamin Harrison V, was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and a governor of Virginia. He was a strong advocate for American independence and worked closely with leaders like Thomas Jefferson. His legacy of patriotism and public service deeply influenced my family's values. My grandfather, William Henry Harrison, was the 9th President of the United States and a renowned military leader. He gained national fame for his victory at the Battle of Tippecanoe and later served as territorial governor and a U.S. Senator before winning the presidency in 1840. Sadly, he served only 32 days before passing away, the shortest presidency in American history. Growing up, I was well aware of their contributions to the nation. Their legacy instilled in me a deep sense of duty, a belief in strong leaderships, and an understanding that public service was both an honor and a responsibility. While I never sought office simply because of my family name, their influence certainly shaped my desire to serve and uphold the values they fought for. Okay, this is a strange subject, Mr. Harrison, but I understand there were some grave robbing issues with your father's grave. Can you talk about that? Yes, unfortunately, grave robbing was a serious problem in the 19th century, especially with medical schools needing cadavers for dissection. My father, John Scott Harrison, who served as a U.S. Congressman, passed away in 1878. After we buried him in Congress Green Cemetery in North Bend, Ohio, a shocking discovery was made. While preparing for his funeral, we learned that the body of a recently deceased family friend, Augustus Devon, had been stolen from its grave. Suspecting foul play, we launched an investigation, which led us to the Ohio Medical College in Cincinnati. To our horror, during the search, we found my father's body hanging by a rope in the college's cadaver chute. His grave had also been robbed. The news caused outrage, and the scandal brought attention to the widespread practice of body snatching for medical research. Laws were later strengthened to regulate the use of cadavers for medical study, but at the time, it was a deeply painful experience for my family. We made sure my father was properly reburied, with additional precautions to prevent further disturbance. So, what has your life been like after your presidency? Well, after leaving office in 1893, I returned to Indianapolis and resumed my law practice. I've also written and given lectures on constitutional law. One of my most notable contributions was representing Venezuela in a boundary dispute with Great Britain. How have you spent your retirement years? I focused on writing, family, and legal work. I've spent time with my young daughter Elizabeth and enjoyed a quieter life. Before we conclude, what do you consider your greatest accomplishment? Strengthening the executive branch, advancing civil rights, and modernizing the military stand out. But above all, I hope I'm remembered as a leader who acted with integrity and dedication to the Constitution. President Harrison, thank you for sharing your story with us. It's been a pleasure. What you are about to hear is the oldest known recording of any U.S. president, Benjamin Harrison. It was recorded on an Edison wax cylinder.
As President of the United States, I was present at the first Pan-American Congress in Washington, D.C. Believe that with God's help, our two countries shall continue to live side by side in peace and prosperity. Benjamin Harrison.
The co-producer of An Interview in History, Kay Beurig, is related to President Harrison, as he is her 3 times great-grandfather. In February 1901, Harrison developed what was thought to be influenza, then called grippe, which later proved to be pneumonia. He was treated with steam vapor inhalation and oxygen, but his condition worsened. Harrison died from pneumonia at his home in Indianapolis on March 13, 1901, at the age of 67. His last words were reported to be, "Are the doctors here? Doctor, my lungs." Harrison's remains are interred in Indianapolis's Crown Hill Cemetery, next to the remains of his first wife, Carolyn. After her death in 1948, Mary Diminick Harrison, his second wife, was buried beside him. And now, another forgotten history. In 1937, a man walked down the streets of Freer, Texas, carrying a revolver on his waist. A scene that might seem out of place today, but was not uncommon during that time. The early 20th century, especially in rural areas like Freer, was marked by a strong sense of personal responsibility for self-defense. Firearms were an integral part of daily life, often carried by men as a tool of protection, hunting, or as a symbol of independence. The presence of such weaponry on public streets was not viewed with alarm, but rather as a practical part of life in a frontier-like environment. Freer, located in South Texas, was a small town where lawlessness and presence of criminal activity were concerns, particularly during the Great Depression. The revolver, often holstered at the waist, represented both a physical means of protection and a social norm. Guns were also a common sight among ranchers, cowboys, and lawmen who frequented the region. In many ways, this reflected the broader culture of the American West, where firearms were embedded in the identity of the people. While today's world is far more removed from the circumstances of 1937 Texas, this moment in history serves as a reminder of how times have changed. The image of a man with a revolver walking casually down a quiet street is a snapshot of a different era, when life was often shaped by survival, self-reliance, and the rugged landscapes of the American Southwest. Join us next week when we talk with Henry McCarty, alias William H. Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid, who was an American outlaw and gunfighter of the Old West. Until then, take care.